Right.
Hello. So I'm going to share two slides. I'm going to talk about one concept, which will then relate into a lot of other concepts. And that concept is the path of least resistance. So our brains, effectively, the unconscious part, is always looking to conserve energy. And the more stress we're under, the more it will look to conserve energy. And this is why when you look at bread and circus, there's the quote, given bread and circus, they never revolt. It's effectively when people are either kept in a comfortable state or they're kept in a fearful state, generally what they're going to do is they're going to be very careful about their resources in the fearful state. And they say like when someone's got 1,000 problems and they get a health problem, they've then only got one problem. So the health problem literally becomes the problem that overshadows everything else. So what's really key about understanding this path of least resistance is that so much of behavior will begin to make sense. So this is the classic, and there's many different types of this on the internet that you'll see the person's supposed to walk round, but that's not the path of least resistance. So they generally go through here. Now, whenever you're faced at a field, if somebody's already walked a pathway, that's the pathway you're going to walk, and you're not even going to think about that. When you go to drive somewhere, if there's two options, you're going to drive the path that's the least of path of least resistance for you. It might be that you're going to go the way that has the least traffic lights. It might be that you're going to go the way that has the best views. It might, whatever it is, but you're generally going to go the path of least resistance, and that resistance essentially is what feels better. So I'm just going to open this model up. So basically, what we've got here is we've got the conscious mind, we've got the elephant representing the unconscious mind, and then we got the map.
We can't see that. Have
Oh,
you
I need
opened
to
it?
share, don't I? So
Yeah.
I'll go for that last slide because you would have lost the
Oh, there
right.
we go.
You can see now.
We
Right,
can't,
it's not the
yeah.
first.
Now we can see RP behavior model. Yeah.
Yes, you can see this picture now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
Yes.
path of least resistance.
Yeah,
Yes.
so this was the picture I was talking about, which is effectively um the pathway is supposed to go round, but people have gone through the middle because that's become the path of least resistance. So in order to get to where you want to get, people will unconsciously, and this is the key, and unconsciously is what most of the time we are operating in, will go the path of least resistance. So if you're to drive somewhere, as I said, there's two ways, but one of them's got roadworks, you're going to go the way without the roadworks. If one way has speed bumps and you don't like speed bumps, etc. And when you think about how we've been manipulated to buy things and whatever, you'll find that the single important factor is actually ease. And that obviously represents the path of least resistance. Now, that's well studied in all marketing, which the biggest single factor of return business is how easy as it was for your customer to buy from you. Now, this is really important to understand because you can tell people, don't buy from this company because they're not very good, etc. But they know that consciously, but the desire will be very much unconscious. Now, why do we do different things? Because it's no longer the path of least resistance to us. So, so someone that doesn't think that EMFs are bad, to have Wi-Fi turned up fully will be the path of least resistance. But when you suddenly realize it might be affecting your sperm count, your heart, your brain, all these things, Wi-Fi is no longer the path of least resistance. So you've got obstacles on that path, if that makes sense. So in terms of this RP behavior model, there's only four things that we really need to, well, five things that we really need to understand to have a very good overview of behavior. And that is something quite profound because from that point, all the biases will begin to make sense. So you've got the conscious mind, you've got the unconscious mind, which we'll represent as an elephant, which comes from Jonathan Haidt's work, and the map. Now, the map is basically your view of reality. So in that map, if it says to you that masks protect you and they're a very good thing to wear, then there's a good chance you'll wear it. If in there it says, well, they're useless and, they're used to make us be quiet, then you won't wear it. So what's in that map is very, very key. Now, when any behavior is to occur, what we're going to do here is we're going to just create a simple binary decision. So let's say that A is to, you know, comply and B is to not comply at the highest level. And then we can replace the A and B with any amount of decisions. And obviously you can have 3, 4, 5 choices. When it gets more than 4, then generally people will be overwhelmed and generally won't do anything. So that's an important point to understand, that too much information actually causes people to do nothing. Now, these circles, what I'm going to do is put these on these as obstacles. So in this particular point, there's almost a balance because there's 2 on one, 2 on the other. So generally which one you choose will be, it doesn't really matter in a lot of senses. But when you get to this point, generally the person's going to go down pathway B. Yeah. So if pathway A was to not comply and pathway B was to comply, the person will feel more pull towards the go down B. Now, if then, and this just represents that when there's too many obstacles, people just end up getting stuck and chasing their tail. Also, when there's too many obstacles on the pathways, that induces learned helplessness. And then that induces apathy. So in fact, what they do is
I,
pretty much,
I'm David, I missed that word. What was the first thing that induces
oh,
what?
it learned helplessness. So pretty much they
Oh,
know
learn.
they can create in a classroom, you can create learned helplessness in 20 minutes in a group of students. Okay. All you
Wow.
do is you give them a puzzle, right? So basically what they did was they split the classroom up into two. You had the left side and the right side. They pretended that everyone had the same question puzzle. And then what they did was they gave the ones on the right side the easy one, and the ones on the left side, they gave them an unsolvable problem. And then what they did, they said, right, put your hand up when you solved it. So all the people on the right side put their hand up. On the left, once they did that 3 times, by the 4th time, which was an easy puzzle, the ones on the left had given up. That makes sense?
Wow.
If you don't feel like the thing
Yeah.
you're doing can be solved, and look at what's going on with the world. So many people in the truth movement will have come to the conclusion nothing I do makes any difference, so I'm not going to bother. And that's because that's been, in my opinion, induced on purpose. So the key thing here, or the first step, is what we presented on Friday, is to understand how to remove these obstacles, which are only perception based. Now, when that happens, then you've got an outlet to action, and then you actually become quite motivated. Now, removing those obstacles is actually fairly straightforward and it's quite profound. But what you'll see here that's really important, imagine that elephant is a herd of elephants. Okay. What they did to create that mass formation is that they blocked pathway B, which was non-compliance. So effectively, if you didn't take the jab or whatever, you couldn't shop, you couldn't do anything. So it became very difficult. And then pathway A, they paid a load of influencers to walk down that pathway. And then another key factor in this is to shrink the change. So what they would do is they'd place loads of steps. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the yes ladder in sales. So basically, you just get them to do a little bit of a commitment and then commitment. And then what happens is, and when you've got a few influencers going down there, pretty much the herd just looks around and follows. But they won't really realize that they're doing that because it's actually a survival instinct. And historically, it's been a useful one. If the herd is hungry and everyone's moving towards a forest, you can assume that someone spotted something and everyone's going there because there's, plentiful food. But because this is being hacked and people are being paid to go towards something that's not in their best interest, a lot of people are just looking around and following. So there's a lot of key bits of information for us in terms of a campaign and how we adjust our strategy to get movement. And that's the real key because if we want people to stop using EMFs, to say throw away your phone is too big of a jump for most people. The elephant, which is really the part of our mind that controls behavior, will do what's known as a reactive motion. Well, it will just push against. Even if you can give 1,000 logical reasons why, that will make no difference to the unconscious mind because it doesn't think in logic. It's thinking in feeling in how it affects it. And its primary purpose is now, in the moment. Let's survive now. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'll deal with tomorrow. And that's why the conscious mind's really key, because the conscious mind is to literally look ahead and direct us. But a lot of that is going out the window. So does that make sense in terms of what's guiding behavior? Because then some really interesting things begin to come into forefront, which is I was quite mind blown by some research that I saw recently, and I'd known about it for quite a while, but it hadn't really made sense to me, and it does now. And this is the thing, that the elephant is observing our behavior and it's adjusting our belief system according to our behavior. I'm probably going to have to repeat that again because it's pretty well, it sounds complex, but it's relatively simple. So we think that we have to change people's attitudes and behavior in order to change, attitudes and beliefs in order to change their behavior. But in fact, most of the time it works the other way around. If you can get them to do one thing that they don't have a resistance to, or that, that really helps that way, then they will start to shift their belief system about the sort of person they are, and they will want to be consistent. That is why those studies around getting people to sign a petition are so powerful, because by the sheer act of signing a petition tells your unconscious mind that you're someone that cares about that subject. And that's why there was such dramatic results from things like signing a petition. Now, how was this used against people? By mandating something, you're then behaving a certain way. And then what happens is you'll change your belief systems to support your own behavior, because if you don't, you end up getting dissonance. And of course, as long as that step isn't too far, then what they can do is they can gradually, incrementally move a person's belief system to the point where they can turn them into a fascist, and they won't realize that's what's happened. Does that make sense? Because that was quite profound for me.
Yes, I don't want to interrupt you, but there's a quick story that illustrates that perfectly. If I can take 1 minute to share it, but
Sure.
if not, I won't.
Yep, feel free, Kate.
Cesar Millan, who trained dogs. Cesar Millan trains dogs, and there was one dog who was shying away from everything. So the person she lived with, couldn't walk the dog because she'd shy away from baby carriages, from anything, a car, anything. And so Cesar Millan, what he did was he put a short leash on the dog's collar and put another short leash on the dog's tail. It's almost illustrates what you're talking about, not quite. On the dog's tail. And he took the dog outside and walked with the dog, holding both these leashes at a fast clip, walked at a fast clip, holding the dog's head up and tail up, because that's the posture of confidence for the
Yes.
dog. And when the dog walked that way a few more times, the dog thought she was confident and learned the new skill. Sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
it's actually really what you're talking there, Kate, is much more profound than I think we can realize at first. So that concept is actually called self-perception theory. And what it's shown is that, the physiology that a person will exhibit, particularly in an animal, will reinforce back to affect the mental state, which is, so if you smile at yourself in the mirror, before doing something, you will actually shift your mental state to happiness. And Lee, it is so strange, these things that are going on, that it really shows how we're actually very malleable in terms of where we are. Now, there's some really profound things around that whole thing of self-perception, is that I think what it does is it's you being able to communicate to the elephant. Yeah. So if I just share that again, so what I've noticed in myself is that the way I was motivating myself was quite funny. I was motivating myself by trying to reason with my unconscious mind. But there's no reason or logic center in the unconscious mind, because the unconscious mind fully developed before consciousness or logic. So effectively, trying to reason with someone's unconscious mind is like trying to talk Portuguese to a Taiwanese person. It's ludicrous. So this explains why so much of the propaganda shouldn't have worked, but it did. That makes sense. So as an example, I've managed to motivate myself to go to the gym according to the program that I set for the first time in many years. And one of the ways that I was able to do that, instead of saying to myself, "Go to the gym, it's good for you," I imagined someone telling me, "Oh, you look great now." Yeah. That the second one actually motivates us. The first one creates no motivation. So in in order to learn, so the key to all of this, if we want people's behavior to change, we've got to learn to communicate with the elephant. And that's where stories, metaphors, and questions become the key way to do so. But understanding the triggers in the unconscious mind that respond to things, and they're effectively approval, control, safety, and separation or oneness. When we connect into those, then you'll see people's behavior shift. And of course, today, I wouldn't expect us to really understand this in detail today, because it's really to get the high level concept. And then what we can do is we can brainstorm some solutions, and then I can explain, why that would work. And then in no time, you'll understand this model.
Great, thank you.
But David, how does the map, if you can change the map,
Yep.
that
Well, the map,
will impact the
yes,
elephant,
behavior.
the
Yes.
elephant perception of what is difficult and
Yes.
what is not.
Yes. Well, the elephant's always moving towards pleasure and away from pain. That's its primary function. Okay. And of course, ease is pleasure and difficulty is pain. So this explains a paradox that we have. The reason that people don't resolve their problems is because they're trying to move towards pleasure and away from pain, but the thinking about their problems is painful. So they get caught in this paradox. And that's why you see this push pull me all the time. Now, the media, there's a well-known saying in the media that people would rather be entertained than informed. Okay. Now, that's because they move towards pleasure and away from pain. Generally, being informed is quite painful, because it's, when you think about school, it's textbooks, it's laborious, it's all these things. But it's not mutually exclusive. So this is why Virgin used behavioral science on their in-flight safety video, and they went from nobody watching it to 6 million people going to YouTube to watch it, who weren't even on a flight. So this leads us to a very important point, that if we can make the information entertaining, that will get people engaged and watching it. And for me, it's pretty straightforward to do that. There's plenty of YouTube channels that manage that, but that tends to be the defining factor. And this confused the hell out of me, because I was like, well, we've got information that's absolutely critical for people to know. Yeah. And it's so key, but not many people are interested in it. Makes sense? Because it was too overwhelming, it was too difficult, it wasn't entertaining enough. So Amanda, on Friday night, you noticed that I'm trying to make it much more entertaining whilst at the same time being informing. That makes sense?
Absolutely.
But if you
Yeah.
don't do both, it just doesn't work. Yeah. So So there's a number of key points to take away, which, we could probably, list a number of them, but it's effectively, you've got to get someone taking that first step and make that first step as easy as possible and as entertaining as possible. I mean, things like pride in knowledge.
Mm.
Pride in knowledge is the number third reason that people click on links. So people love to show off about their knowledge. So what the bullshit pushes in the telecoms industry has done is given them a buffet of excuses like there's more radiation from the sun, et cetera, et cetera. So that person then has a pride in that knowledge, and that's why they parrot that nonsense out. Along with, obviously, they want it to be safe because they use it so much. Yeah. So we need to understand all the forces at play in order to come up with some things. But the simple fact of the matter is, if you can get someone to do one thing around protecting themselves from EMFs, they are then going to be the sort of person that sees themselves as doing that. That makes sense. And then you're gonna see them take the first step. And then what happens is they get momentum. And if you go gently enough without it being too difficult, they'll then be the sort of person that gets Ethernet at home and et cetera, et cetera. Because for the most part, most of the campaigners are ones that have had, problems with illness around 5G. They're pretty much motivated for any number of reasons. But we're trying to reach the mass audience that will have the standard set of drives. That makes sense. And we need to tap into those. But using that model around the elephant is pretty much how I would think about doing this. So I would first think about where I want someone to get, how to motivate them to want to go there, and then shrink the change so there's only a few steps. And of course, to talk to the elephant, not the conscious mind, because the conscious mind is really just the press office. It's the unconscious mind that's the Oval Office. It's making all the executive decisions, and it's also the one that's governing behavior. Now, if I just share one story, which really showed how, and it's from the book Switch, which is a very, very good book. So if you combine the book Switch and the Path of Least Resistance, I think that you would have a very good understanding on how to start to plan campaigns to be much more successful in a step-by-step approach. So in the book Switch, they had a guy that went into a massive corporation. It might have been General Electric. It was somewhere. And he was in charge of purchasing. And the company spent like $1 billion a year on purchasing. And no, actually, he had worked out that they probably wasted $1 billion a year in their purchasing department. Now, if he goes into the boardroom and says, like, we're wasting a load of money here and there, everyone would go, yeah, whatever, but it won't really move them. What he did was he found one of the ways in which they were wasting money the most, and it was buying gloves. And apparently they bought like 200 different types of gloves with like from 300 different suppliers in X amount of different prices. So he had one example of these gloves from the 300 different types. He hired out the boardroom and he put them all onto the boardroom table. And then he invited everyone in to look at them. And everyone was just speechless. That makes sense? Because he showed them, he didn't tell them. And that showing of them really hit them deeply. That's why that post I sent you, Catherine, that got so much engagement.
Yes.
Yeah. Because it's so real, it's so concrete, it's so emotional. It's things like that that really jar me. That makes sense. And they're the sort of things that we
David,
want to start. Sorry, Kate.
no, I interrupted you. Please finish.
I was going to say the post that I was talking to Catherine about is a really tragic story of this child, I think it was a teenager,
Yes.
but he had Wi-Fi next to his bed that was
I
right
put
next
it
to his
actually on. I put it on the Safe Tech International Facebook page, Kate. You probably saw it. It's called
Oh, yeah.
Justice. Yeah. Sorry,
Oh,
David.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
didn't.
so
Yeah.
things like that. Now, obviously, we would want to use less of the tragic ones as possible, but that will jar. But things like if you were to measure the radiation coming off the earbuds and then found a way to have scientists explain, why it's a problem, then give them context, and then say this is a very simple thing to solve. Yeah, because that is the earbuds. Like, I mean, the drive for people wearing them now is just because it's become normal to have a wireless earphone. But quite frankly, the sound's always worse. Yeah. The radiation's horrendous. The cost is high, just so then you would play on, um, you know, people want to look good, but people don't want to acknowledge that they want to look good. Like, there's this, let me explain another story. So basically, everyone knows that people buy BMWs for status symbols. Okay. But they know that everyone else does. They don't. Okay. Now, this is a really weird thing that goes on because we can't see why we do something. We think we do it for other reasons. Okay. Because we can't see the desire in ourselves to have a status symbol. A lot of people can't, some can. So when BMW drivers were interviewed, there was a select of them that were lawyers, and and it was a really funny conversation where he goes to one lawyer, he says, "Do lawyers buy BMWs for status symbols?" And the guy goes, "Yeah." He says, "But you've got a BMW." He said, "Oh no, but I buy it because of the comfort and the etc." And that's known as and this is so true. This, in fact, is the number one psychological phenomenon that's really key, and it's called misattribution. So people misattribute why they're doing things. So when you ask someone why they took the jab, they're going to tell you to protect you and protect my family because they don't really know that they took it because of herd mentality and fear and just to fit in. That makes sense because that's not socially acceptable to admit that. I've actually got to run. I'm sorry I ran through this pretty quickly, but hopefully you can see at a high level how it's so important because you can run any campaign idea through it and you can pretty much see whether it's going to work or not because it's almost a checklist of is it too big a jump? Will the unconscious mind understand it? Will the conscious mind know that it makes sense? And will the map agree? So when you get those, the five things really are the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, the map, the pathway, and the obstacles. And if you,
The I I know you have to go. I'll just leave you with this one question. I was dealing
yes,
with a neighbor because they're laying quantum is laying fiber in our neighborhood, and she was deliberating. And the bottom line that it came down to why she chose not to go with the fiber was finances, because
yes,
the industry has the finances worked out so that it's much more cost effective, and she just plain didn't have the money.
yes. Well, that's incentives. So
Right.
that's really important. So
Right.
what they do is they incentivize you to go down the pathway they want you to go. And that's really
Exactly.
powerful, Kate. So talking about that is really key. Right. Nice to see you all. Hopefully I'm available. Actually, it's my birthday next Tuesday, so probably the Tuesday
Happy
after
birthday.
I'll come back. But Amanda,
Happy
we can
birthday.
talk about this pathway on that email thing. But for me, this is really key because I think it will allow us to produce much more effective campaigns.
Sounds
Brilliant.
great.
Thank
Right.
you so
Catch you all.
much, Dave.
Thanks,
Awesome.
David.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, just thinking of that, there was that little exchange on the email group, and I think it started with David's ideas, and then it came, and then Sean contributed, and he had this idea, which I thought was brilliant, of having an interactive exhibition, that
Oh,
shows
wow, I
people
didn't
the
see that.
meters and,
No, what a
all
fantastic
the
idea.
how different things affect people. It would be like, and it reminded me of the Science Museum, Amanda. I always used to take my son there when he was at the French Lycée because it was just around the corner, in South Kensington. And they had what they called the launch pad. And that's where I first saw a fiber optic cable demonstrated, but huge. It was a sort of 3 meters square. They did a display of how it operated with the little fibers, and you could see the different colored lights with LEDs. And, it would be awesome to get something like that sorted out, like here's Stuart, my partner, who's just come in, to get some kind of interactive exhibition going in high streets. I don't know. I feel that the smallest version of this is us demonstrating with our meters. I mean, I've got my meter here. I've shown so many people. I'm going to show our Airbnb host before we go. And I try to kind of like downplay it, but that showing, as David said, it's so powerful for people to see the meter and to see how when you put it near to their smartwatch, as I did the other day, or you put it near to the router, they can see how high it goes. They can't deny it. It's like the gloves on the table that David was talking about.
I was wondering if there would be some way, when Kate was describing the graph that showed what happened to her brain after an injury, if that technology could be applied to like have an electrically sensitive person, before they're exposed and then after they're exposed. And because we should be able to start mapping, and not even just a sensitive person, but I think, like when a person is walking and looking at a cell phone, it has to shut down a lot of other senses. And, it's just very clear to me that the body doesn't want to be doing like a fine-tuned thing, like walking and texting. It does a hyper focus to the near field, and you lose the ability to pay attention to what's going on around you. And I feel like there has to be a way to start measuring and showing that.
Good idea. That's a really good idea. Shall I just say, shall I stop recording? Because I realize we're
Oh, yeah.
I really like